Welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. As a surviving sibling myself, I knew that I wanted to share my story, my brother's story. I lost my brother to a homicide in November of 2016, and after going through this experience, I knew that I wanted to share my story and his story. It's time to share your stories now. The forgotten mourners, the surviving siblings, the story that is not told enough. Season 3 of the Surviving Siblings podcast is brought to you by sibsforever.org, a virtual platform for you, the surviving sibling, to commemorate and honor your sibling relationship. Visit sibsforever.org today to create your free profile and start building beautiful commemorative web pages that can include photo and video galleries featuring you and your sibling. Now, let's dive into the episode. Today, I have another incredible guest with me. Her name is Rachel Woodruff. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here. I met Rachel locally here in Atlanta, which is always exciting for me. I met you through the Compassionate Friends. Rachel is an incredible facilitator for the siblings group here. And today, Rachel is going to share the story of her brother, Aaron. So Rachel, I'm going to hand it over to you so you can share your grief journey and the story of Aaron.
Thanks so much. So my brother, Aaron, was killed in a motorcycle accident June 22nd, 2002. So I always kind of have to think about how many years it's been. It's been a lot of years, over 20 years. It'll be 21 years this June. Like most of us, I remember that day like it was yesterday. I remember getting the phone call and my response to that. And I remember what happened after that. I mean, just that whole series of events, even though it's been a long time. My brother was my only full brother. I do have 2 half sisters. They're a lot younger than I am. So he was the one that I was raised with. He was the one I had a shared childhood, shared background, all of those things that we have with our siblings. And so when Aaron died, it went from being Rachel and Aaron to just Rachel. And I didn't know what to do with that. What do I do with just being Rachel? What do I do with not being that older sister to Aaron? Even though I had 2 younger sisters and I love my 2 younger sisters, it's just a different relationship with them like I was with Aaron. So Aaron was killed in a motorcycle accident, as I mentioned. He was living in Colorado. I was in Atlanta at the time. I had moved here maybe 3 years before he died for graduate school. And then I got a job and stayed here. And I'm from Colorado, so that's where I moved out here from. So Aaron was in Estes Park, Colorado, which is a popular area. He went up there on a Saturday evening, motorcycle riding with a friend of his. They went out for dinner. It was a beautiful Saturday evening in June. So they went out out for a motorcycle ride in the mountains. Aaron was riding a motorcycle that he had bought about a week or 2 before. And then a friend of his that was with him was riding his other motorcycle. So both the motorcycles belonged to Aaron. They had their dinner. And on the way back, they were crossing over, for anybody who maybe has been to Estes Park, but they were crossing over a dam. So it was a straight, very visible, straight road. And so Aaron was speeding on his motorcycle. I always want to make a lot of excuses. He was speeding. But that said, there was a vehicle that was coming the opposite direction that he was going. So he was heading east at that point, and there was a vehicle heading west, and that vehicle wanted to make a left-hand turn, and they made a left-hand turn in front of him. And it was basically a head-on collision. Aaron died at the scene. That was on a Saturday evening, and I got the call from my dad on that Sunday morning. My dad said to me, Aaron and Todd, his friend Todd, this is how much I remember this, his friend Todd. I don't even know Aaron's friend Todd, but I remember Todd's name. Aaron and Todd were motorcycle riding. They went to Estes Park. On the way back, Aaron got into an accident and he didn't make it. And my mind went, I don't know Todd. I don't know Todd. So this is meaningless to me. This is nothing. Because I didn't know Todd, my brain was saying, this isn't happening because I don't know Todd. So not very logical, but that's where my brain went.
And that's where all of our brains kind of are when we get the call. Like, I had no idea when I first put that episode out and called it The Call that, like, almost every single person I've talked to, every person I've had on the show has the call story. So yeah, we're not thinking in that right state of mind at all. I get that completely.
Right. And I relate to everybody's story about that call. And I love that you did a full podcast episode on that, because I think it is such a heartbreaking moment, like the most heartbreaking moment of our lives. But it is that pivotal moment that changed everything. You know, there was a before that call and an after that call. And those are two different periods in my life.
Yep.
And sort of wrapping your head around that call and getting your brain to, like, you know, realize, okay, this is really what my dad is saying. And I can't, you know, just because I don't know Todd doesn't mean Aaron wasn't with Todd and they weren't motorcycle, you know, sort of coming to that realization it's really profound. It's really, really hard. And I think our brains obviously, you know, have a mechanism to protect us, you know, hence I don't know Todd, this isn't happening because I can't even fathom it happening because it's too hard for me to even not accept, but to realize that this happened. It was really that day. That was, like I said, that was a Sunday morning when my dad called. That Sunday, I had actually, so Aaron died 8 days before his 27th birthday. So he died on June 22nd. His birthday was on June 30th. So that Sunday, I already knew what I was going to get him for his birthday. He was a bit eccentric. He was a character. He loved bow ties, like the old fashioned bow ties. And he didn't like this. Right. He didn't work in an office. There was no, like, he didn't need to dress up for anything.
Yeah. But it was just his flair, like his thing. I love that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so I had seen at a local shop, and he loved butterflies and he loved the color purple. He was just, you know, and I had seen these bow ties with butterflies on them. And I was like, I'm going to get him a butterfly bow tie for his birthday. And I was planning to get it that day so that I could get it in the mail so that he would receive it by his birthday. I still went and got it because I couldn't not do that. You know, I couldn't not get him that butterfly bow tie for his birthday. And actually, I ended up donating that bow tie to the Compassionate Friends conference for their conference store that they do every year. So anyway, I felt like in that first week, actually probably the first 2 weeks, like I was just having an out-of-body experience. And I think I've heard a lot of people talk about that sort of phenomenon and that sort of feeling where we just can't relate to the world around us. Everything looks weird. It's like I was living in an alternate universe. I couldn't understand people. Like, why would you know, how are you laughing? How are you just going about your life as normal? There's nothing normal. And just doing daily things was like just beyond my comprehension.
Yeah.
You know, and music, certain types of music, like I'd hear, and I was like, it would just felt like nails on a chalkboard. Like I couldn't stand it. So all these reactions to grief and to this sort of loss that we don't seem necessarily intuitive. You know, why would this song bother me? Like, it's not anything, I don't know, you know, it wouldn't have bothered me 2 weeks ago, but now it's like this horrible sound and I can't stand it.
No, I understand what you're talking about completely. And I'm sure a lot of you listening are connecting with this as well. And it took like an extra step for me because my brother was a musician and I like could not listen to music at all, or any band that sounded anything like anything he had ever created. I remember sitting in a lot of silence. So I'm really connecting with this part of your story. I connect with a lot of your story because my brother was 27 when he was murdered. And so I'm like, oh my, like I remember us meeting. I'm like, wow, we have a lot in common in this. But like you said, I find that as surviving siblings, we really connect in one way or another with the stories. And the call is always a beginning connection, I find too. But yeah, I love that you're bringing this up there, Rachel, because music was like, oh God, I don't want to hear this. And like, there would be like one lyric or something. And I was like, oh, I'm set off. I can't listen to this. Like, going to the grocery store, like having to get things to survive. Like it was like I was in a Twilight Zone episode or something. Like the world was different. And I'm like, so I think a lot of you guys can connect with this too, because it's what I realized to be normal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. And music, yeah, like you said, I think music can just touch us emotionally sometimes. And so I remember for the longest time, Christmas music, like particularly like choir type music would just bring me to tears. And it didn't really remind me of Aaron necessarily, but I think it's just that really emotional reaction. And it just, so things like that, just things that I would not have, before having this experience thought were related to grief, and I just have also learned through the compassionate friends and meeting so many siblings that we all have things like that either trigger us or things that sort of dig into our grief a little bit that we wouldn't have anticipated. And sometimes we don't even associate it with grief. Like why would that song, be related to my grief? But especially I think in the first few years, everything is related to our grief. I mean, just, even things that aren't obvious. So it's been a journey for me. It's been many years. I miss Aaron. I think about him, and it's hard to believe that it's been almost 21 years. That is really difficult sometimes for me to even comprehend that, because I remember him so clearly. And I do want to say that when I was early in my grief, there was a point where I felt like my grief is what I had left. Like Aaron, this is in the first couple of years after Aaron died. Mm-hmm. I was afraid to let go of any part of my grief, even the most painful parts. Like it's not that I was trying to, be sad all the time necessarily, but I just didn't. I was doing things for myself, like going to compassionate friends and reading, and I was in therapy. But I also, at the same time, didn't want to let go of any of the grief, even the painful part, because I felt like this is what I have. This is what I have of him. And I now realize, being this far into my grief, that sort of letting go of those parts of my grief doesn't mean letting go of him. And doesn't mean that he's still not a part of me and with me all the time, and that I don't still think of him and remember him, because those were some of my fears early on too. Like, I'm not going to remember, I'm not going to remember what he sounded like or what he looked like. So, and Aaron died before social media and before some of this, everything was sort of electronic. So I do have, which I'm so fortunate to have, I had a VHS. Actually, it wasn't even VHS. It was one of those tiny little camcorder cassette tapes that I had to transfer to VHS. And then I paid to have it transferred to DVD. And now I need to pay to have it transferred to, some
digital.
Other digital. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. I have to, because I don't want to lose it. But it's a video of me and my brother. And it was probably maybe 6 months or so before he died, at the Denver Aquarium with his daughter. So my brother has a daughter. She was 4.5 when he died, and she was around 4 at the time of this video, or not quite 4. She was probably almost 4. And and my brother loved his camcorder because he loved taking video of, his daughter. And then I was there. So we did this. Anyway, so I have this. So I keep transferring it to different types of media so that I don't lose it. But I don't have a lot of that,
Right.
Because it just wasn't as widely available and common as it is now. So, but I even aside from that, I do remember, what he looks like, what he sounded like, the way I don't know, his personality, the way he reacted to things. I know that over time, memories maybe fade a little, but what I was worried about was just losing that altogether, just kind of forgetting. And that's not the case. So I'm really happy, that that's not the case. And hopefully that, brings hope to people who are earlier in their grief.
I think I am so glad that you're bringing this up, Rachel, because you are over 20 years into your grief journey. As we know, it's a lifelong journey. And I think this is a fear that I hear all the time in, groups, in Facebook group, like all over the place, right? Just all of us who have lost a sibling, we have that fear. And I personally went through this as well. I'm like, again, connecting to this with you being years behind you, my grief journey. But I remember it really hit me. I was always kind of, that fear is like in you. And it's really, I hope we're inspiring all of you listening, because it's not a good thing to be focusing on, right? So if you can kind of get that relief from someone like yourself, Rachel, who's over 20 years in, I'm over 6 years now. You're right. They don't fade. They're still there, but there's some like you don't think about as much, but the really important ones, they're there. And, you do have things that you can remember them by. So you're going to remember them. They're in your life forever, which is a beautiful thing. And that was such a relief. But year 5 for me was when I started to freak out. I was like, oh my gosh, which I've shared. And that was part of the reason why I was like, okay, I got to do this podcast. Like, I got to put it all out there, do this podcast and share. And part of it was because I didn't want to forget, and right. Then, the majority of it was in honor of my brother and to help others. I was like, if I can help one person, and now here we are helping a lot of people. Yeah. But, that was kind of always eating at me over those years. And year 5 is when I really allowed myself to feel it. I was like, you have fear. How do we move forward or move past this fear? And that was my way of quote unquote dealing with it, I guess, or an outlet for it. And I'm so glad I did that. And I think everybody should. And I think that's amazing that I love the story of you taking, because I have so many VHSs of like my brother and I as like kids, and I want all that, to be digital. So I love that. I think a lot of people can connect with that too. Yeah. I love that. And I love that you have it of his daughter, and like, oh, what a beautiful memory.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is a beautiful memory. And I have photos, but none of my photos were digital. So I found myself, after Aaron died, of course, putting together as many photos as I could find of him and, me and him. And, I had photos growing up, but then even photos in our young adult lives. And I remember there was one, and all of it was film. So I have negatives. And I found this one negative, and I could not find the actual photo anywhere. And I got kind of obsessive about it. I was like, I have to get this photo. It's a great photo of me and my brother. And, I had the negative, and for some reason, I was never able to find that photo. So I don't know what happened to that one, but, so I did try to collect all of that sort of stuff. I also, after Aaron died, went through this, like, I wanted to share his stuff too. So I gave a lot of things to his friends and other family. And now that's one thing I maybe wish I had sort of taken a breath and waited a little bit, because now I'm like, oh, well, I gave away all that stuff. But I felt like I wanted to share. I wanted other people to be, because it was my way of like, the more people that have things of his, the more he's going to be remembered, I guess, is kind of, what I was trying to do. But
I don't think you're alone in that, Rachel, because I think a lot of people, and I think that's a really, really good piece of advice for all of you listening. And if you're early in your grief journey, like, kind of take a beat, take a minute, think
Yeah.
about it, because you may be like, gosh, why did I give that shirt away? Or why did I give that guitar away? Or why did I give that bow tie away? You know what I mean? It's like, it's a beautiful sentiment because you want to share your brother with or sibling. We both lost brothers, so we're talking brothers today, but it's the same thing, right? And I think we want to share because that makes it real. It makes it real that this, person in our life, our sibling, existed and will still exist in another way. But I think that's why, and I can connect with that too. I'm sure you guys can as well. I really connect with that. But I think it's important when you're in kind of the fog and what you're talking about, like you feel like it's not real, take a second, because you may go, I kind of wanted to keep that bow tie because I remember this really great memory of me and Aaron.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Right. That's exactly it. So it's, but we're making decisions in not just grief, but in those early stages of grief, which is, there should be a different name for that segment of our grief. Like, I don't know what that would be, but because we're just not, you can't think logically. You can't think ahead. You can't think in terms of, am I going to regret giving this away? Do I want this? Or is there somebody else I want to give this to? Like, you're like, I know in my brother's situation, he had an apartment, he didn't own a house, but we, it was mostly me and my dad had to clean out we had to clear his stuff. And that's, we didn't have, I know some people maybe don't have to do that right away, but we had to do it right away. And so we had to make decisions about what to do with things. And that was really hard. My brother didn't have a whole lot of stuff, but the stuff he had, he took really good care of. He had a lot of pride in the things he owned. And he had, when he bought stuff, he would he bought a mountain bike, and he wouldn't just buy like the entry level mountain bike. He had to buy like the $2,000 mountain bike or whatever. But he took really good care of his things. And an interesting story related to that, he had a backpack that, that he used for everything, commuting and whatnot. And the backpack ended up with my mom. And about a year after Aaron died, I went out and visited my mom, and I found the backpack not being taken care of. And I was so mad. And I was like, and I know so this is the thing that's so interesting, right? Like, it's just a backpack, but it is not just a backpack, And I was like, you have lost your privilege to own this backpack or have this backpack in your possession. I now get the backpack, and I still have Aaron's backpack, and I still use Aaron's backpack, and I will always have it. And, and I take care of it because he took care of his things, and he would not have liked the way it was not being taken care of. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Mom, it's true. You were not taking care of it. So, but it was not just a backpack to me. It was Aaron's backpack that he would have taken care of. And so it's now in my possession, so I can take care of it.
I love that. And I think a lot of you guys will connect with that too. I understand that. And I also understand what you're talking about when it's like, because my brother had roommates and we had to go into which I shared on season 1. And I, was left out of that. It was my parents. And so they were scrambling, and I just, they weren't, of course, as parents, weren't in the right state of mind to really figure out what to do with his stuff. And same kind of situation. My brother was a free spirit, didn't have a lot of stuff, but he had to have the best. Like, he had to have the best guitar. He had to have the best, so things like that. But so I connect with that too. But thank you for sharing that about the backpack, because first of all, how special is it that you have that? But you were so channeling Aaron and like, no, we take care of this. We take really good care of these nice things. Like, I love that. And I love that we're able to do that. And I think that's really important as a message for all of you listening and surviving siblings, that, we want these things, and like we kind of channel, and like that was an important thing for you to have, but we kind of channel our sibling, and that's how they live on too. We know what they would want and how they would continue their life. And Yeah, that's what gave me the courage to finally tell my story. And so I love your backpack story because that's so like your brother coming through you. I love that. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Rachel, I do want to go back for just a second because we're trucking along. I want to go back for just a minute because I know a lot of our listeners always like to hear what happened right after the loss of your brother. And again, something I share with you, my brother, it was a Saturday when I got the news. You got it on Sunday, but it happened on a Saturday as well. So again, it's kind of eerie, the stuff in common. But so you went to purchase the bow tie. Love that part of the story too. You have so many beautiful moments in such tragedy. But did you go out to Colorado, or what happened between kind of you and your parents and the family? What was the dynamic there and the evolution right after Aaron passed?
Yeah. So I will say that some of that is a little fuzzy to me. So I pretty much remember, but there are some details that it was such a painful time. And like we've already said, we feel like our brains are kind of in a fog and we're living in an alternate universe. So there are parts of that are a little bit fuzzy for me. But yes, I did go to Colorado. I think, and this is where it gets a little fuzzy-ish. I believe I flew to Colorado on that Monday, and I flew into Denver and rented a car and drove 2 hours to where my mom was living. And I remember I stayed with my mom, and my dad flew in, and other family members flew into Denver. We did have a memorial service, and I do remember being in the funeral home and making selections, which, what do you want in the program? What kind of, and Aaron was cremated. So do you want individual urns and like all of these things that just throw you even more into a fog because you're like, why are we even talking about this? This is not what I want to be talking about or thinking about or doing. But so I think, maybe a lot of siblings can relate to this as well, that as the surviving sibling, is the child of the parents who have experienced this loss, I felt like a lot of that came to me. A lot of the decision making. My mom could not function to make a decision. So the funeral parlor director was looking at me to make decisions. And my dad, was a little bit more, I think, able to make some of those decisions, but I did feel like a lot of it was put on me to decide, and my dad was asking me, well, do you want this urn? Do you want this? And I was like, I don't want an urn because I don't want my brother to be dead. So no, nothing for me. Thanks. But wait, yes, I guess I should have something. I mean, it was just like in my brain, trying to make decisions about something that you do not want to be making decisions about because you don't want to even, acknowledge that it's happened. It was really challenging. We did a memorial service, and I vaguely remember some of the people who were there. One thing I do remember is a family member, and I can't remember. So these are the details I say that I get so fuzzy on, but a family member was coming in at the airport. They were having some trouble or something with their flight. And again, none of this was online at the time. I was making phone calls. And so I called the airline because I was trying to get some information about when they were coming in, and ended up in a huge fight with the person on the other end of the phone. And that's not like me. That's not something I normally do.
Yeah, I don't get that vibe from you, Rachel.
No. But I don't remember why, because it was probably nothing. It could have been that they said something like, why do you need this information? And I freaked out on that, just freaked out. So I remember having it was ridiculous, screaming match or something with this person, which of course then I, was didn't get the information I needed because then this person was upset. And I think in retrospect, that actually taught me a lot. I remember that experience because now when the tables are turned and somebody's maybe reacting in a way that I wouldn't expect them to react. It's always kind of in the back of my mind, what is happening in this person's life? Because I wonder if that person would have been different or reacted differently or been maybe a little more patient with me. I don't know if she knew that my brother had just died and I'm trying to get my family members in town for his memorial service. But of course, I didn't say that. I just started like freaking out. So things like that. So we had the memorial service. I wrote a eulogy of sorts. I did not read it. I had somebody else read it. And I remember greeting people at the service as they came in and talking to people and family members. And, I had some of my friends who didn't even know Aaron came to support me. They were local. They came to support me. And at the very end, after all the remarks had been made, it's weird. Like I didn't even feel it coming. It's like when you trip and fall and like you didn't even see what you were going to trip over and you fall and like, have a really bad fall and break your nose or something. That's kind of how it happened. All of a sudden, I just had a total meltdown and I was like sobbing and I was on the floor. I didn't see it come. Like I didn't even know it was going to happen. It just was all of a sudden there. And people were like running over to me and trying to help me and trying to and talk it like, and it was like, just this flurry of activity trying to help me and get me up and get me in a chair. And, and that lasted a couple minutes. I was like, no, I'm okay. I'm okay. But that was because that's also not really like me. I'm not emotional in public. Like a lot of my grieving is very private for the most part. And so for me to have a breakdown in front of people, now, obviously the situation was my brother's memorial service. So,
right.
But that was really just unexpected for me to do that. So I remember that. And really after that, I actually don't remember a whole lot. I know I came back to Atlanta. Of course, being a sibling, we don't get I didn't get a lot of time off work. I pretty much had to go right back to work. And that was really difficult as well because I needed time during the day to myself to grieve, to cry if I needed to. My coworkers some of them were fairly understanding for about, I would say, 2 months. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, okay, you're fine now, right? So I remember the first work-related travel I did after Aaron died. And it was 2 or 3 months after he died. And I remember saying to a colleague, I said, I think I'm ready for this now. I'm not sure. It's going to be really hard. And she was just like, what are you talking about? But she like just she was like, oh, really? Is this still about your brother? Like, and you can't travel? And I'm like, traveling takes a lot of energy. It takes concentration and it takes organization, all these skills that I don't have right now during grief. I can't remember anything. Actually, I carried a little notebook around with me for probably 2 years to write things down in because I couldn't remember anything. Like my whole brain was just taken up with grief. And that was just, just this. And I was like, oh, okay. I think that's when I started to realize I can't, maybe being an open book, just sort of out in the world, maybe I need to save these kinds of thoughts for my compassionate friends group where people don't think it's crazy, where people understand and relate and, support me in these, sorts of thoughts. So, yeah.
Yeah, oh my gosh, so much to unpack here, Rachel. Oh my gosh. I connect with so much of this and I'm sure you guys do too. So with the work situation, absolutely, I get it. You guys have heard my story. I was like, I couldn't even, my first trip was to Mexico and that was rejuvenating for me. And I'm so grateful that I was able to do that for myself. But it was a little misleading because I thought, okay, I'll jump back into a new work. And that was the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. But yeah, I was like, no, okay, 1 week in Mexico is not gonna like fix it all, Maya, because I'm kind of like a speed it forward person. But
Yeah.
I connect so much what you're saying, because as I've shared in season 1, the only person that I would like shove myself in my office, because you're right, like work does not, like if you're a bereaved parent, which we know is completely traumatic, and we're not diminishing that at all, but this is traumatic and we don't recognize it. And that's a mission I think both you and I are out to change and out to help. And
Yeah.
they just were like, okay, but like, are your parents good? Like, you need to stay strong, like get it together. Like that was the mantra going on for me. And people just, unless you've been through it, you just don't really get it. You just don't.
Yeah.
And so I think you're giving like a really great example and story and wonderful advice, I think, from both of us, is like, just remember these people don't get it. Like they don't understand, and it's not like offensive, but it can feel, and I hear this from people all the time, and I'm sure you hear it even more than me as a facilitator. It's hurtful because you're like, this is so real. Like I'm not even in my world. So that's one thing. And I'm so glad that you shared that. But I want to go back to your story about the urn really quick, because oh my God, when you were telling this, I'm like, I was literally going back in time. It's interesting how we do this, right? When we share. And I remember being there, and it was me and my mom, which was ironic in my story because I was left by my family for like a period of time. And then I'm here. And I so connect with you on this, because I did not pick out an urn that day for my brother, because we were splitting the ashes and a lot of it went into the creek, as you guys know. But I picked one out for my dad. I was like talking to my dad, because he was a little bit of my rock during this. And I was like, Dad, what do you want? And my mom even was like, you should probably handle that part for your dad. And I remember telling her, I'm like, what do you want? I was handling everything. And then it got to a point where being in there was so overwhelming, I had to walk outside.
Right.
It like sinks in the reality a little too much. But I walked out with an urn for my dad, because I know he loves blue, and they had a connection to the ocean. So it was like an ocean thing. But like later, I like ordered the urn that I wanted for my brother, which had a tree on it and stuff. But I wasn't thinking that way. It was too final. It was too intense. And I had to be there for them. So I was like going there in my mind. I'm like, gosh, I know what that's like. And I'm sure a lot of you guys do as well, whether you go through cremation or it's a funerals, like a traditional or whatever it is. You're kind of expected to be the strong one for your parents. And it's something we don't always talk about until it happens. And that's a lot of pressure. So wanted to make sure we went back to that, because, I understand where you're coming from there. Definitely do. Mm-hmm.
It is a lot of pressure. And I think that's where we get referred to sometimes as the forgotten mourners. You know, people forget that, or don't recognize that, you know, we're in a lot of pain as well. And I know I've shared this story with you, but I'll share it again, because being part of the Compassionate Friends has been amazing. And I think we're really fortunate in the local chapter in my area that we have not just a parent group. So a lot of Compassionate Friends groups may just have a parent group, depending on the size, you know, of the group and what sort of facilitation, you know, that they have available. But we're really lucky with our local chapter to have a specific sibling group. And I share often in that group that I know just specifically for in my situation and my mom's situation, you know, my mom and I were talking about our grief once, and she said, you've never lost a child. You don't understand. And I said, that's right. You're absolutely right. I haven't. But what I know is that this is the worst grief you've ever been through. And this is the worst grief that I've ever been through. And can't we just, you know, support each other through our grief? For me, it wasn't useful to compare grief and say, you're right, you're going through a harder time than I am, so I should not acknowledge my grief so that I can help you through yours. I've just, you know, I didn't really understand that. I didn't understand why she wanted to compare. And I said that to her, and she said, okay, she did acknowledge that, fortunately. She did say, yes, you're right. He was your brother, and I know you loved him. And, yeah. So I think that that's another sort of common thing, is that parents losing a child, we sort of rank it, right? We sort of rank these things. A parent losing a child is the worst. That's the worst. And I don't disagree with that at all. I do not disagree with that. But I think me losing my brother, I just still think that's the worst grief I've ever had. And it was very severe grief, and it's serious grief, and it is still grief. It's like you said, we just kind of live with this for the rest of our lives. It never goes away completely. It changes, but it doesn't go away. And so anyway, so that's, I like to tell that story in our group a lot.
Yes. And when you shared this, I'm like getting a little emotional right now. I don't know what it is about season 3, but you guys are like really getting to my like core, my emotions. It means that, we're telling some really good stories here, and hopefully you guys are connecting with this too. I think, and I've said this a million times, and I'll probably say it a million more. Maybe I said this in group too, Rachel, but I think it's ingrained in us that like the worst thing that can happen is to lose a child. That's ingrained like very young culturally, and I think you and your mom being able to openly talk about it like that, and you being able to say that to her, and then her responding in that way, even though she was like, you just don't understand. And like, that was her grieving. But the fact that she was able to recognize like, oh, I think that's such a gift to you, because you're right. Comparing grief. Oh, I've talked about it forever. And again, I'll talk about it a million more times. It's just, you can't, you absolutely can't, because no, you haven't lost a child, but you lost like your first friend, your first enemy, your partner in crime, your first, fight, you go through all these things with your sibling. And that's something that they potentially haven't been through. If you have a parent that's been through it, they're probably going to understand you a little bit more. But I think what you're saying is just like there's so many gold nuggets already in this episode, but that's a huge, huge takeaway I hope that you guys get from this, because it makes me emotional, because it really validates our loss and validates how we feel. And it is, I can't imagine losing my own child after the pain I've been through, losing my brother. I don't have children yet, but I can empathize with it, because the pain of losing my brother is not something I'd wish on anyone. Doesn't matter what you've done to me. Would never wish it on anyone. So I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yep. I agree. And that's one of the first things we say in our group. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you found our group, but I'm so sorry for the reason. And I would say the same thing to you. I'm so glad I met you, and I'm so sorry that I met you, because of the reason we met. Nobody wants to meet that way. We also talk a lot in the Compassionate Friends, going back to something I think that came up a little earlier, about things that people say that are not helpful or are hurtful. We spend a lot of time in our group sessions talking about that. And I think sometimes people are well-meaning. Sometimes they just don't know what to say. Sometimes they're scared of your grief. I think people are scared because they don't know how to react. They don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. So, and I understand all of those things. And before Aaron died, I probably reacted the same way. I would not have known what to say. Sometimes maybe I still don't know what to say, but I always try to sort of dig deep and think, okay, what really helped me? And sometimes what really helped me was just somebody to say, I'm sorry. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to make excuses for it. We talk a lot about, and I'm sure so many people can relate to, things like God takes the good ones young, or he's in a better place, and then there's also this sentiment that, well, if Aaron hadn't died, I wouldn't have done some of the things I'm doing now, which have made me a better person or a more well-rounded person. I was good enough.
Thank you for saying that, Rachel. Yes, thank you for saying that, because people will say that to me sometimes, and I'm like, yes, like, maybe, especially people who have a strong faith or things like that. And like, that's okay. And I respect that. And I'm very spiritual. Like I believe in God and, that's, we all have our personal beliefs, but I'm like, I love that you just said that. That's so perfect because I'm like, yeah, I was good. Like I was good. But yeah, I mean, if people, I've been asked some interesting things, which is what we're kind of talking about, or told interesting things. And, I was asked a couple of times, like, would you go back in time and change it? I'm like, yeah, I want my brother here. Like, of course. But at the same point, you get to a point in your grief journey where you're like, this is my life. And so I guess that's quote unquote acceptance. I don't know. I think you feel all the different things at different times, and we can go into a whole other episode on that. Right. But I love that you're talking about this. And, obviously I know you talk about this in group, but yeah, there's things that people say, and I'm with you. I'm all about that. If you don't know what to say, just say I'm sorry or I'm so sorry. And I like when people are just like, I'm here for you, and if you say that, be there for them. Like, don't just say that. Right. But yeah, I think you're bringing up a really, really important point here because people just don't know. They really don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Something you just said made me think of another thing that I think about a lot, which is acceptance. And to me, and we talk about this a lot in group too, because I know that I understand, and I've done a lot of therapy, so I understand acceptance and I understand the reason for it, and that it's actually meant for me. It's not meant for the person who, and I do use this terminology, the person who killed my brother, because I didn't go into the details about the accident report, but based on the accident report, he cut into my brother's lane. He says he didn't see him, and I don't believe that. I never have, and I still don't. So acceptance is, but I know that that's supposed to be for me. It's not for that person. It's not, it's really for my own emotional and mental health and well-being. I have never used that term for my brother's death. To me, it sounds like accepting the fact that he died. And or not so much accepting the fact that he died, because I think I do that. So let me rephrase. I think to me, saying acceptance means it's okay that he died somehow. Like I accept that, and it's not okay. And it will never be okay. So I actually prefer to describe it as acknowledgement. So I acknowledge that he died. I know that it happened. I'm far enough in my grief journey. I know that he's not going to come through the door. I know that it's real. I know, I acknowledge these things, but to me, I don't know. And it may just be semantics and my own way of defining it, but I've always been really hesitant to use the word acceptance. That's been really difficult for me. So, and honestly, I don't think that has been detrimental to my mental health or my grief journey, or, I feel like that's okay. So
I feel like I love that because that, they say there's either 5 or 7, stages or phases. You bounce all over the place. I've heard people, they've sent messages in, which you guys can always send us messages. We love that. But, there's people in groups and just all over the place with sibling loss where they feel so like rushed. Like they have to be like, okay, I'm in denial right now. I'm in depression right now. Like, it's not how it works, But I connect so much with this, Rachel, because acceptance was, for, I guess, a lack of a better term, triggering for me. Because I'm like, I'm not going to accept the fact that this guy murdered my brother. So like when you were just talking about that, about Aaron, I'm like, oh my God, yes, Rachel, yes, I get it. But how you're kind of rephrasing it makes so much sense to me. I do acknowledge that my brother has passed away. I do acknowledge that my brother was murdered. I do acknowledge that it was not right what happened. And I get asked a lot too, Rachel, well, aren't you still angry? Aren't you still that? Like, I don't live in that emotion anymore, but It's not to say that I don't experience that quote unquote stage or emotion at times when I'm talking about it. So I love, love, love that you're saying, like, I acknowledge that this has happened. Because I think it's, you're not in the fog, or you're not, you've come into awareness. And I think that's so much healthier, because acceptance was always, for me too, that was the most intimidating quote unquote stage or terminology for me, because I'm not going to accept the fact it was okay that this guy did this to my brother. I'm not going to accept the fact that like my brother is gone at 27. Like I'm not going to, but I acknowledge that it happened. Wow. Right. I love that. Love another just wonderful nugget for you guys to take away there, because I think that's huge. Sometimes just rephrasing things is so helpful, right?
Yeah. And there is so much emphasis on acceptance, and I understand that. But for me, it didn't work. It didn't work for me. So I found something that did.
Yeah. Acceptance, and this whole idea of closure that I talk about all the time too. There's closure doesn't exist, but that doesn't mean that you can't move forward, right? It's the same kind of concept. So I love that we have another term in our kind of tool belt here for grief. Thanks to you, Rachel. Acknowledgement. I love it.
Yeah. And closure. I completely agree with you. I don't like that at all. So one of my favorite, I guess, analogies or metaphors, I actually don't know what it would be. I think analogy, but anyway, one of my favorite sayings, I guess, that I actually learned through Compassionate Friends is that time does not heal. It leaves a half-stitched scar. Because another thing we hear a lot, I think along the same lines as closure, is that time heals. Time heals all wounds. That's sort of a common sort of saying. But I really, really resonates with me that time does not heal. It leaves a half-stitched scar, because it's like we've mentioned several times, this just becomes a part of who we are, and it's always there. And it is kind of like a scar. So the feelings, emotions, those early grief days, being over 20 years into my grief, it is different. It is different. It's not that acute pain that I felt. It's not that overwhelming sadness and grief, but it's still there. It doesn't, closure is an odd term to me. Like, okay, I'm done with that, and now I go, but you're never really done with it. It's just a part of who we are. We just incorporate it into in the Compassionate Friends, they say the new normal, into the new, life. And it doesn't mean that we're not moving forward. It doesn't mean that we're not healthy grieving, that we're, just in denial. I just don't think those are the right terms. At least for me, they weren't.
I agree 100%. And I'm sure most of you guys listening can connect and agree with this as well. And thank you for sharing that, because I remember coming to group and hearing you say that. And I was like, another incredible person with another analogy, metaphor, whatever you guys want to call it. But that's so true. Time heals all wounds, like that one. And then when you said that, when I met you, I was like, yes, this works. I connect with this. Rachel, so before we close, I definitely want to talk about your role as a facilitator and Compassionate Friends. If you can, tell us about, because it's intimidating for some people to go to group. I hear that, whether I'm on TikTok, Instagram, wherever I'm posting about it, I'll talk about group, because, it was all virtual for a while and back in person. So I was so excited to come in person and interact with you guys. But I didn't find group till later in my grief journey, and didn't come in person. 6+ years until I was in an in-person group. I love it because I'm an extrovert. You probably know this about me already. I'm not shy to tell my story or to listen to others, but I think it can be intimidating for other people if they're more introverted, or if they're in the fog in that beginning phase where, sending my love there. But tell us a little bit about when you first went, and also kind of give some advice to people that are maybe a little apprehensive to doing group, because they might do therapy, they might, dabble in some things, but they're not ready to go to group. I think group is incredible. So if you could share that, that'd be awesome.
Yep. Oh, yeah. It is really, really hard. It's a hard thing to do. I started going to the Compassionate Friends. My first group meeting that I attended was about 2 months after Aaron died. And for me, it was desperation. I wanted to, I couldn't control the fact that Aaron had died. So I was trying to fix something. I was trying to control something. I was trying to fix my grief. I don't know. I was doing anything I could to try to, I don't know, fix it. So I found the Compassionate Friends online and I went to a group meeting. It was really scary. It's hard because you don't know the people. You don't know what to expect. You don't know anything about it, especially if you haven't done that sort of thing before, which I hadn't. Our Compassionate Friends group does meet in a church. And for some people, that could also be intimidating or not, depending on how they feel about that. But Compassionate Friends is non-denominational. It's not a religious organization at all. It's not affiliated with a church. That's just where we go for our meeting space. That's the only relationship, is that they provide some space for us to meet. Mm-hmm. So the first time I went to the group, it was definitely intimidating. I did go by myself. Sometimes people bring a friend with them, and that is completely acceptable. If you have a close friend or another family member, whether it's a sibling or not, that would come with you if that makes you more comfortable, that is 100% acceptable. Our Compassionate Friends group is geared toward adults. So I get that question sometimes. Can kids come? We really do try to keep it more in the adult age group. So I think our official policy is 13 and over, but we rarely get people as young as 13. Sometimes we have maybe a middle school, sometimes high schoolers, but it's mostly young adults, middle-aged adults, even people up in their, maybe a little past middle age. So it's really a variety of age groups, but it is geared toward adults. The advice I would give is if you're not sure you're ready and you want more information, reach out to your local chapter. I know our local chapter has contact information on the website. I'm sure most local chapters do, if not all of them. You can always reach out. We also have a Facebook page, Atlanta Siblings, TCF Atlanta Siblings. And you can reach out that way or connect with other TCF groups. I'm sure most of them, if not all of them, are on social media. You can call. So I've had phone calls, and I'm always happy to talk to people and let them know what the group is like and what to expect. And then, you have to decide. And it is definitely, it's not for everybody. But I will say that most people who have come to our sibling group, they come in. I've had parents say, I'm going to bring my daughter and she doesn't want to come. And I say, okay, that's fine. She can just sit and listen. She doesn't have to talk. But 90% of the time, a person who comes in thinking they don't want to say anything and they're not going to talk, and that is 100% acceptable as well. There's no rule. They will talk because they'll hear something that resonates with them. They'll hear something that makes them want to share, even if it's just share a little something. They'll hear something that inspires them some way or something. And that's always my goal or my hope, I guess, more than a goal. My hope is that I can say something that helps somebody in some way, that somebody resonates with, so that they don't feel alone, or they don't feel like I thought I was the only one that thought that way or had that thought, because you're probably not. But if you don't know that, you don't know that. And it feels like you're isolated and alone and, that you're the only one thinking this way. So it can be really intimidating and really difficult. And we usually say, try to give it three chances. So try 3 meetings. Each meeting is a little bit different. There are different people who come, and that can change the dynamic. If one meeting you don't hear something that resonates with you, maybe you will in the second meeting. And so, sometimes people come multiple times, sometimes they don't. But again, it's totally, there's no rule. I'm not a professional. I don't have any sort of clinical degree or therapy degree. I'm just there to give back from my experience and to try to help facilitate discussion. And like I said, hopefully share something that will help or resonate with somebody else.
Well, I've seen you in action and you definitely do that. So yes,
Thank you.
Rachel. But no, I really thank you for being so in depth and sharing that, because I feel like we're kind of pulling the veil off of the mystique of what it's like to go to group and what it's like to go to, I think it's really important, because again, like I said, there's so many people that want to go, or they're apprehensive, and I love that you share that they can bring someone they're comfortable with. You don't have to say a word. But yeah, I've seen this too. You coming to your group for the first time, but also in other groups, the people that you think maybe won't share, they just open up because they hear something they connect with. And so I think, in this part of our conversation, I hope that we're giving hope to all of you listening. Like, if it's a fit for you, like, give it a shot, because you feel less alone. You're like, oh man, that person felt that too. Or you kind of take tidbits of everybody's stories and you connect, kind of like we do on this podcast. And I think that's really beautiful. And I really commend you for going 2 months afterward. Like, oh my gosh, I think I'm always blown away when people tell me they went so early, because I wish that I had known, but also I think we're all on our own path. And so I've learned to kind of accept that about myself. I think that's also a message I would give to all of you. And I'm sure you agree with me, Rachel. Go when you're ready, and go when it's something, that you're a little open to. I don't know if you're ever ready for some of these things, though. You just kind of have a moment where you're like, I'm going to go. I'm going to do it. And, maybe you don't come back for a little while, or maybe you're like, yeah, I'm really into this, but it's different for everybody.
Yep, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. Don't force yourself, to do anything. If, and you're right. Somebody might be waiting until they're ready. They may never be ready in the sense that they're like, yay, this is exciting. I can't wait.
Yeah.
But more in the sense of, I've been contemplating this for a while. I think I can handle it. That to me is more like the readiness. I think maybe I can give it a try.
Right. And then just kind of push yourself a little bit. And if you need someone to come with you, or I think that's amazing. And that's what I really loved about this group too, is that you guys are open to having that supportive person with you, whether it's a significant other, another sibling, a friend, whoever it is. I think that's really, really beautiful. Rachel, I mean, just the amount of information that we have gotten out of this, I hope you guys have gotten so much knowledge and just inspiration with over 20 years on your journey. And we know you have a lifetime to go with this. But I want to ask you one question before we let you go, and also tell us reiterate where to find all these groups. If you could go back, I always ask this question, I'm sure you know this. If you could kind of go back in time over 20 years ago, what's something that you wish Rachel 20 years ago would know, like when you got the call, or maybe right after you got the call? What's a nugget of advice, which I know you give all the time in group, that you could give to these incredible surviving siblings that listen to the show? Because we're all over the place in our grief journey. I think it's an important thing to ask.
Yeah, I think that is such a good question. And it's actually a little bit difficult to answer, because I think that there are a lot of things, but I think one big thing I would say is just, try to let yourself be where you are. And I think Maya, you had talked about how we sometimes put a lot of emphasis on the stages of grief. But I would say toss out all that out the window. It's good background information, and it's okay to have for reference. And maybe it's good for a therapist to have that information to be able to help you better. But as far as your own grief, I would say toss that out the window. Let yourself be where you are. Be patient with yourself. Understand that sometimes it's just 1 second at a time. It's okay if you can't plan for your day, or if you can't think about what you're going to make for dinner, or you like, just 1 second at a time is sometimes the best we can do. And so I would just say, let yourself be where you are and have a lot of patience.
I love that. I love the 1 second at a time. Because that's really kind of how you're operating I mean,
Yeah.
in that time, I mean, gosh, it was like a huge achievement for me to take a shower,
Yeah.
or like actually go for a proper walk with my, dogs. Cause I adopted a second one like right afterwards. What was I thinking? I don't know, but I'm so grateful because I love them both to death. But oh my gosh, like that. But maybe subconsciously, like I did that so that I would, right, do those things. So I love that you're saying 1 second at a time, because everybody's like one day at a time. A day feels like a mountain, like it feels like you're climbing Everest. So, again, lovely piece of advice. Rachel, tell us, because everyone listening is from all over the place, tell us where they can find their local chapters, because I've already told people like, hey, this is where you could go, but we want to hear it straight from our facilitator here. Where can they go to find more information about the Compassionate Friends?
Yeah, of course. So the Compassionate Friends has websites, and they're also on social media. So I know that they have some pretty active social media. So I don't know all the specific names, of course, of all the different chapters, but if you were to go on social media and look for the Compassionate Friends, you would probably pretty easily be able to be connected with the national organization. And from there, you could drill down to your local organizations. The Compassionate Friends also has websites. Compassionatefriends.org would take you to the national website. And then my local website is tcfatlanta.org/sibling. And even if you're not in the Atlanta area, there are actually some resources on that website for siblings that might be useful. And then again, any surviving siblings are welcome to join the TC of Atlanta siblings Facebook page as well. So those are some of the ways that you can get connected with Compassionate Friends.
That's perfect. Yeah. And of course, we're going to include all of that in our show notes. So you guys can just click and join us in Facebook if you're not local to us, or if you want to go in person, we'll put the main link there. But I was easily able to find local chapters, as I was mentioning before we started recording, for a couple different people that were asking. They had no idea they had multiple chapters they could visit in their area, which I think is wonderful. So Rachel, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your grief journey, and of course, Erin's story as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for letting me share. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it for you, then share it on your chosen social media platform. And don't forget to tag us at Surviving Siblings Podcast so that more surviving siblings can find us. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Surviving Siblings Podcast. All links can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out too. Thank you again for the support. Until the next episode, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.